conditions to keep all the rest of us safe and healthy. Our job is to try and keep you entertained for the next 2 hours, and that's what we shall do. And it starts on a busy morning with Get Up and Go, which today is brought to you by Claritin. And we begin with the president saying yesterday that numerous sports executives will be part of a group of more than 200 advisors to help shape plans to reopen the economy. Included are the commissioners of virtually every major professional sports league and some of the team owners. Elsewhere, Dana White is now eyeing May 9th for the UFC's return at a still-to-be-determined location. White told ESPN he's already deep in the process of building out the card despite the recent postponement of UFC 249. Elsewhere, employees from 27 of the 30 Major League Baseball teams are expected to participate in a massive national study that'll test up to 10,000 people for coronavirus antibodies. And the NHL is extending its self-quarantine recommendation for players, coaches, and staff through April 30th. It is the third time the league has pushed back its timetable since suspending play on March 12th. And the PGA of America is planning on holding the PGA Championship without fans in August. Same time, Golf Digest is reporting the PGA Tour will announce an updated schedule later this week that could resume June 11th. And then to our top story this morning, Dak Prescott still without a long-term contract after being franchise tagged by the Cowboys last month. And the quarterback reportedly will not participate in any of the team's virtual offseason programs without a new deal. Cowboys CEO Stephen Jones was asked about that report yesterday.
I'm not necessarily aware of that. He certainly was sent an iPad, and I know he certainly can participate. Every player, for every player, it's voluntary, and in terms of their participation in the virtual meetings. And but I'm not aware and hadn't been made aware of to what degree Dak's participation level would be.
All right, let's get a closer look at this. Our insider, Dan Graziano, is up early with us this morning. Dan, what are we hearing regarding Dak's offseason participation?
Hey, Greeny, talking to people around this situation, my understanding is that Dak Prescott has no intention of participating in the offseason program absent a new contract. They obviously have been working on a contract extension, haven't gotten there yet, and as you mentioned, the Cowboys franchised him. Until he signs that franchise tender, he's not technically under contract with the Cowboys, so even if it were mandatory, he wouldn't have to participate. And at the bottom of this, it's not. It's voluntary. So we have a situation where if the Cowboys were gathering this week or next week to start their offseason program, then Dak Prescott would not be there. Since they're going to be doing virtual meetings, virtual workouts, he's not going to participate in those either unless they sign a new deal sometime soon. So it's really no different than if it were a regular situation where they were getting together for an offseason program. At this point, as the franchise player without a long-term contract, he is not planning to participate.
Well, the difference, obviously, though, is that he's not in any danger of getting injured. One of the reasons players will give for not going to any kind of workout during the franchise tag period here is because they're afraid of getting injured. That's obviously not on the table in this circumstance.
Well, except, I mean, yes, that you could get injured working out at home, which, you know, that's a situation where, you know, the team could elect not to pay you if you worked out at home, so and got hurt, non-football injury, et cetera. So I think we can take this as a statement. I mean, the man wants a long-term deal. They've been working on it for about a year now, and until he gets one, he's going to act like a player that's still looking for a long-term deal. His leverage is to not be there.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I meant, really, was just to suggest that there's just no question about this. He's making a statement. I'm not showing up. I'm not doing anything until you show me the money. And if you ask Marcus Spears, as he was fired up on NFL Live talking about this yesterday, he thinks Dak is doing exactly the right thing.
Ain't no way in hell I would until I got my money. I talked about it. I talked about this about a month ago. I'm not doing anything. I'm not saying the Dallas Cowboys name until his contract is done. When you feel like you have a value and you feel like you should be paid and you're not, it's the age-old thing that players do in the NFL. They withhold services. They withhold their availability. That's what Dak Prescott is doing. And if I was his agent, I would tell him to do the same damn thing.
All right, never one to mince words is Marcus. Never one to mince words either are Dominique Foxworth and Rex Ryan, who join us this morning. And Rex, I want to start with you from a coach's perspective, particularly in Dallas right now where Mike McCarthy is in his first year with the program. What do you think of the way Dak is handling this, and what impact do you think it has? I've absolutely frozen Rex with the genius of that question. Could you tell he was mesmerized by the brilliance of that question? We will get back to Rex at some point shortly. Meanwhile, Dominique, if everything goes well, you'll be able to answer this part of it. You heard Marcus suggesting that Dak should take this thing as far as it goes till he gets a deal. What do you think?
I absolutely think that Marcus is right, and Dak shouldn't show up. He should withhold those services, as Mr. Spears said, because that's the only leverage he has. And the Cowboys seem to have suggested to him and insinuated that that's the right thing to do, because we can go back last year to Zeke Elliott, who actually held out. As Dan pointed out earlier, Dak is not technically holding out. He has not signed a contract, so he doesn't technically work for the Cowboys. So Zeke last year held out, didn't show up to camp, went to Cabo and got a contract extension, became the highest paid running back of all times at that time. So I don't know what the Cowboys thought was going to happen a year later if they continued to not pay Dak. And Zeke had the benefit of being a first-round pick, which means he made a lot more money leading up into his extension. Dak didn't have that benefit. He was taken much later and has provided just as much, if not more, production for this team than Zeke Elliott has. So I don't know what they expect him to do. He tried to do it the so-called right way up until now, where he came into camp and he played well. And he thought that they were going to give him an extension, and they haven't. So now he needs to go about it this way, where you just don't show up. And again, he's not breaking any rules. This is not in holdout. He does not work for them. He's waiting for them to give him a contract, and maybe he'll sign the franchise tender at some point. But he shouldn't sign it until the last minute when he has to, because that's what the Cowboys told him to do by the way they treated Zeke last year.
I get it. Here's the part of this I'm trying to figure out. The fact that all this is being done virtually, that players aren't there and they're not on the field, does that make the time that he's missing more important or less important than it would be under the circumstances?
Honestly, I think it takes a little sting out of Dak not showing up. So the leverage that he has, particularly when they have a new coach, is like, you need your team leader, who is the quarterback, to come in there and help everybody get assimilated with the new coach. They're not changing the offense, so that doesn't matter. But having that quarterback there as that leader matters. But the problem is, no one has that quarterback there to lead right now. So whatever sting that he was going to give the Cowboys by not showing up, everyone else is experiencing that same thing. And I'm not sure having him virtually there is the same impact. So I think that this current situation kind of puts a little bit of leverage back on the Cowboys side, because him not being there doesn't seem to matter because no quarterback is there right now.
Yeah, I sort of see it the same way. All right, Nick, stay with me here. We have a lot we're doing this morning. Let's talk about another quarterback, and that is Joe Burrow, who a week from tomorrow night will hear his name called, we expect, as the number one pick in the NFL draft by the Cincinnati Bengals. During a radio interview yesterday, Burrow was asked about the prospect of playing for a franchise that has not had a lot of success of late.
The draft is funny because you don't have, not a lot of professions that pick you. So, whatever team I go to, it's going to be a challenge to begin, and I'm going to have to, persevere through it. And just like I've done in the past, you might have a really good first year, you might have a really bad first year. You don't really know, especially without OTAs this year, and you're going to have less time with your team. So there's going to be ups and downs for sure. You're just going to have to battle through it.
All right, so Laura Rutledge is up with us early this morning. And Laura, obviously you've covered Joe Burrow as closely as anybody has, and you know him well. He had nothing but success a year ago, and now he's going to a situation where no matter how good he is, there will be struggles. How confident are you that he has what it takes mentally to deal with whatever it is that might come next?
Well, Greeny, we're not even talking about Joe Burrow right now unless he was able to work through challenges the way that he has so far in his career. A lot of people forget because they just think about the success of Burrow from last season. This guy came from Ohio State, where he lost a quarterback battle to Dwayne Haskins. He was close to winning it, unfortunately had an injury, and then was out of the mix, out of the running. Very frustrating for him, and then could never really climb back into the mix there at Ohio State. So he transfers to LSU, which his first year at LSU wasn't all smooth sailing. People didn't think that he was this next coming of finally the quarterback that they've been waiting for in Baton Rouge. And by the way, LSU locker rooms have eaten quarterbacks alive for years. So it wasn't necessarily an easy situation to come into. I think when you think about Joe Burrow and the adversity he's already worked through, he's a guy that no matter what comes his way, he's always betting on himself. And it helps to have people around him believe in him, but he always believed that he could have success no matter what it was. And I think that translates well to the next level. One final point on this. Every time Joe Burrow would have an interview after a game, after a big win last season, you might have noticed he would stand at the center of the field and take a deep breath, almost look around, survey what had just happened. I was standing next to him a couple of those times, and once I asked him about what that was, he said it's just being thankful for it, also knowing that it took a lot of work to get to that point.
All right, it's an interesting thought. I tend to agree with you, and I want to bring Nick into the conversation here as well. I agree with everything you just said. The flip side of it would be, because we know how the college coaches feel about this transfer portal, that when he didn't win the starting job at Ohio State, he transferred. Rather than staying there and sort of sticking out a bad situation, he chose to go somewhere else. That's what some might say in response to what you just said. Laura, quickly, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, what I would say is that he wasn't going to play quarterback at Ohio State, so he had to do what was best for him, for his future, and it worked out in a great way. So I don't have any criticism toward him for doing that, and I think too we're going to just see more and more of that. It's the new age of college football.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I'm sure there are people who would think the other way. Nick, I mean, as I come to you here, you know, we keep talking about Cincinnati as though it is sort of the NFL version of Siberia. The reality is, if you look at the numbers over the last 10 or so years, they aren't as bad as that perception would seem. How far away do you think they are, if Burrow turns out to be good, from becoming a good team?
Well, I mean, I think they have a lot of really talented weapons on that team. The offensive line isn't great, which could be an issue. But if they get a healthy A.J. Green back, they have Mixon and John Ross, a speedster who I really like, and Tyler Boyd, a really effective receiver. That's a good group to throw to. And that defense needs some help maybe in the back end. But they got Geno Atkins. They just signed DJ Reader. And they got Carlos Dunlap coming off the edge. That team has some talent in some key positions. And we're not exactly sure what they have in their coaching staff just yet. But if that coaching staff can put together a scheme, they could be on the rise pretty quickly. They could add a few wins, and I think you can look back over history, and sometimes all you need is just the quarterback to come in. I think we just saw Cam Newton there. He's a guy who, when he jumped in, they went from 2 wins to 6 wins. That may not sound like a lot, but that's a huge boon, particularly if your team is not very good. And the Browns is kind of another example in Ohio of a team that we think of as just kind of a can't-get-right franchise, but they went from 0 wins to 7 wins when they added Baker Mayfield. So I'm not so sure that when Joe Burrow gets there that they don't take a big jump, because they have a lot of pieces there. Maybe the missing piece is a healthy, talented quarterback.
Yeah, well, we'll start to find out. They got a young coach who believes in offense, and we'll see what Burrow can do. Guys, stay with me. We're just getting rolling here. And Burrow, as we mentioned, is expected to be the #1 pick. The overwhelming favorite to go second is Ohio State's Chase Young. We'll ask him how he's feeling a week before the draft and the day after his 21st birthday when he joins us live this morning, 9:30 Eastern here on Get Up. Before that, if you want to have a dominant defense in the NFL, is having a lockdown corner the key, or is the most important?
The depth of this class. 15 of these receivers have a grade from Scouts Inc. of 70 or higher. That signifies a likely third rounder. And that amount, Greeny, would be the second most, in Scouts Inc.'s database all time. So it really is such a deep class. I think that adds to the fact that you're going to see some stars at the top, 5 or 6 guys that are going to be taken very early. But there's a lot of depth throughout this class.
For your money, who's going to be the first one off the board? Because we hear C.D. Lamb, we hear about the Alabama guys, Jerry Jeudy. Who do you think is the first one to go off the board?
I'm going to say Jerry Jeudy, just because I think it fits more with the need of the teams that may be there to pick receivers. But it's really a toss-up between C.D. Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. I mean, look, C.D. Lamb is a guy that, has DeAndre Hopkins type skill sets to him. He's somebody that has that type of yards after the catch toughness. And then Jerry Jeudy has some Odell Beckham Jr. to him, and, may need to be worked on a little bit from the catching and the hand standpoint, but the route running is unbelievable and already OBJ level right now.
And Nick, I want to ask you about something else, because Hembo and I were going through some numbers. And if you look back over the period of time, basically the last 20 years, of first round picks, you look at what percentage of the guys who were drafted in the first round by their team wind up signing a second contract with their team. And by a wide margin, the lowest is receivers. To be clear in what I'm saying, of all the position groups, quarterbacks, linemen, linebackers, the ones that by a wide margin wind up signing a second contract with their team, fewest are wide receivers. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because they're so context dependent. They're so dependent on a good quarterback and a good offensive line. And sometimes I think you could get lulled into believing a receiver is better than he is because he's in a system in college, or he has a quarterback in college who takes care of him, or he goes into the NFL and lands in a system with a quarterback that's not so good, or O-line that can't protect that quarterback. I think because you can't just hand them the ball like you would a running back, and you can't just throw the ball like you would be a quarterback. They're so much more reliant on so many other people to make sure they succeed. As sometimes you can have a tough time grading their performance in college because of that, and their performance in NFL could lag their performance in college because they might end up in a bad situation.
It's a fascinating thing to me. By the way, overwhelmingly, offensive linemen wind up with the highest percentage of teams that wind up signing a second contract if they're first-round picks. But, Laura, do these guys, the guys at the top of this, as we've seen the NFL game sort of evolve over the years, do they play in offenses that are similar to what they will see on Sundays?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's a great point that you bring up, Greeny. I would expect to see that number for wide receivers change just because we've seen a lot of the college game head to the NFL. And I think when you see more of these speed and space offenses that you'll see, a lot of these guys continue to play in, that's only going to work well for them going forward. Some people have said, well, CeeDee Lamb played in the Big 12 and he had a ton of separation all the time against defenders to make the catches that he did. But look, he created the separation. It wasn't always that. CeeDee Lamb played in the college football playoff and did have, despite Oklahoma's numbers in the playoff, did have some success against some big-time defenses. So I think when you look at this overall, we're going to see a shift in more receivers, especially this class, having success long-term in the NFL and maybe signing some of those second deals a little more than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when you didn't want to take a quarterback out of the Big 12, and now they're the number one pick every year, and a guy named Patrick Mahomes is doing okay as well. All right, guys, stay with me here because with this deep NFL draft at wide receiver, we'll get Mel Kiper in as we continue, and he'll tell you what he thinks of all of these guys, plus more thoughts. Don't miss Mel, who will join us coming up in just a few minutes. And with this, Sneaky Hembo is throwing down a challenge to Mel. Here's his question. Which school has produced the most wide receivers